Hello, my name is Lewis A. Dambra. I'm the creator of the world of Colganon and the author of several books set in that world. And recently I've been trying to engage with an audience in a different way, so not just through big, heavy books that get released maybe once a year, but more frequent, smaller drops of writing, mostly through the serialization on my website, Colganon, Her Lands and People. But I've also been trying through written blogs that are more kind of behind the scenes looks at my thinking and my development of the world, and also through more visual mediums, so art, as you can see next to me. This one hasn't been released yet, but it will be in due course, and written works and kind of audiovisual stuff, so more narrated things, a bit of animated videos, kind of myth drops, that kind of thing. Really exploring different ways in which we can attack a created world and look into it and get an idea of what it is, how it works, why does it engage us intellectually. And as I was doing that, I thought I'd write a blog post about, kind of monthly blog about my thought processes, what I found useful, what I haven't found useful, what I find engaging, how it makes me think and think about our own world. So I started those as a kind of written blog to sit alongside those lore drops from Yusakol Kuzua, who was writing Colganon, Her Lands and People. So Yusakol is the wandering philosopher who came to Doldun to teach to Colga. So he brought Colga up in the teachings of Kunpit of Thelonigul about how to become a good king, to try and recapture the lost essence of the god kings from before the dusk. And as Colga set out on his great expedition to explore and ultimately conquer the world, Yusakol wrote this book to give him some perspective on the world he'd be engaging with. So this is almost, these blog posts and now these videos are almost my version of that. So what these are going to be, and this episode particularly, is a more macro look at some of the considerations I've had as I've tried to build a world, some of the problems I've encountered, the way I've started to frame things, my whole framing event that it eventually grew into kind of organically. Looking at some of the first iterations and where I struggled, how long it took me to develop something meaningful, because it took a while. There was a few iterations, a few things thrown in the bin before I settled on this, and I developed something I felt was coherent and really impactful. So in some ways it's kind of my journey, but also hopefully a bit of advice for if you want to engage in this kind of intellectual exercise yourself. Some food for thought and some considerations. So where do we start? Building a world. So when I first started dabbling in the initial thoughts that would become Colganon, I really had no idea that they would become a whole world which lived and breathed, albeit mostly in my imagination. I thought it would be a few kind of dabbled thoughts. The first thing I did was actually draw a map, because I've always been obsessed with maps. I like looking at them, I like considering them, I like thinking about the worlds that they represent. So I started with a map, simple sketch, look nothing like the world does now. And then from there I started developing some stories that might be set in that world. How did the world come to be? Well, how did this city come to be placed there? What would people think about the forest that I've drawn here? This mountain, does that hold any cultural value? Those kind of things started to shape into stories and myths and that were pretty inconsistent at first. They jumped around a lot. I couldn't find an anchor point. And really, the point I'm trying to get at here was I didn't really set any constraints on my thoughts. The whole practice for me was almost a bit of escapism. I was bored in various different jobs, and it was finding a way to just exercise my mind. So I thought putting no constraints or limits or boundaries on myself just to keep my musing going and just dabbling, doodling, drawing, writing, whatever came to mind. I thought that would be the most creative, free way to do things. And to an extent it was. I started drawing, I started creating, I started thinking about things. And that was quite liberating at the time when I was just looking to express myself and free my thoughts in moments of tedium, really. But quickly I started to find that kind of no limits approach, the whatever you think, whatever you want to do, whenever you want to create, shouldn't be constrained. It did not set me on a path of kind of unbounded creativity. Instead, it created a real sense of inertia from that first iteration where I was kind of thinking, oh, I've got something good here, I've got something that works, something that excites me, and quickly you run into this just hard stop of, I don't know where to go with this now, this doesn't add up with this idea can't connect to this one. Almost too many ideas, too many distracting images. It meant that I couldn't form a consistent or connected set of stories that cohered into a whole that was kind of greater than the sum of its parts. The only thing that I found eventually that solved that issue for me and untied that knot and opened up the pathway was the realization that I needed to set boundaries for myself. And almost scale things back, pull myself away from the urge to just go off and try and create and discover, and say, okay, what are the boundaries of my world? How do I make it consistent and logical? Even if it's a logic that's contained within the world itself and might not make sense within our own. So this is where I came upon this layering approach that I'm going to kind of talk through. So creating the physical layer. Much like the great wandering philosophers of Colganon, particularly within the Zosu culture, I've created my own framework through which I build my world and form my ideas into a living, breathing realm. What that framework allows me to do is to set constraints upon the thinking, make it consistent, make it logical, make it follow a path that would make sense within the world of Colganon, not necessarily in our own world. And as a result, these constraints, they don't restrict my creativity, rather they lay a path before me to follow to a kind of natural end point of a consistent story and a world that makes sense. So there's nothing odd within it. There's nothing that pulls you out of the story because you think your brain doesn't see the pattern and goes, where's this come from? The first of these bounds then are what I call the physical boundaries, the physical layer of the world. And these are things like, how is the world, the planet perhaps, conceived? How do the physics work? And most importantly for me as a man who's obsessed with maps, what is the geography of this world? Where are the mountains? Where are the forests? Where are the rivers? How do the seas work? How does the weather work? Because these are the real boundaries upon which the constraints of human society, the constraints of any other society as well, they're physical, natural borders or highways or meaningful cultural objects. So really setting out how that world is constructed, how it works, what are the physical limitations of it, mean that you have then a consistent set of tools and a border in which you can then create and design and build. So these may seem like background details that add some flavour and then just enhance a finished story, but I would rather argue that they are fundamental to shaping the final piece. They're the framework on which you build your world and your stories. After all, we are all prisoners of geography, to paraphrase Tim Marshall, and our history or stories would not be the same without geography and how it affects us, constrains us, or unlocks things for us. So once we've designed the physical layer, I then moved on to, okay, what is that cognitive layer? What's the layers of cognition, the thought that comes as a result of the physical layer? They're intricately linked. One affects the other, and physical particularly affects the cognitive, I think. The other way around, with certain developments in technology and culture, they can, but physical layers really affect cognition. We conceive of the world as we see it. Mountains constrain our thoughts, open plains may open them up. Rivers are boundaries, or are they highways? Seas the same. So with the physical frame established, thinking about how the peoples of the realm, the world, the societies would conceive of their environment suddenly becomes much easier. And for me, that was very much the case. It suddenly became something that was then a path to follow. How would they view the sea, the land, the sky? All makes much more sense once you have a clear idea of the geography and the topography of the world they inhabit. This was much more so the case in Colganon, where the people rely on those things to survive, and such notions are therefore really important. There's more you can do with this, though. So once you have that kind of cognitive layer starting to develop, you can divide it up again into what I call the emotional or the rational layer. That wording may need some thought, but that, I think you get the sense of what I mean there. And then what you may call a rational or a conscious layer. The emotional layer first, and this is the very much the sort of first instinctive feeling that you get when you encounter a situation. What is the raw, intense instinct that we confront with a new place, a new situation? When you see the sky, the sea, does it engender a sense of awe or wonder or fear? Does it make you think that there's something to discover, or make you want to hide? And then you can start thinking about, well, okay, why is that? And that's when we start to move towards the cognitive layer. So the cognitive layer is much more about the rationalization of these instincts, these emotions, this raw feeling. How do we choose that? That is information coming to us. So how do we choose to interpret that information? How do the societies, the peoples within this world choose to interpret that information provided by that emotional layer? It may feel an intense yearning to explore, set out into the roiling ocean. But what do you actually do with that information? Do the society embrace that feeling? Do they feel wonder? Do they feel awe? How does that manifest itself? Does that drive them to build ships? Does that drive them to build bridges, buildings, shelter? What is it? So once we have all of these layers kind of figured out, how do we pull it all together? I have the layers to the world, but how do I construct it into a coherent whole that works as a place to tell a story? How do I turn it into a framework through which stories, characters, cultures feel real, feel human, feel something you can connect to? Even if it is something odd and unique and not quite of this world, there still needs to be that point of connection. Otherwise, it doesn't work as a story. So this is the kind of framework that I approach any story with. It might not be front and centre, but it's certainly in the back of my mind, and it informs the way I start to write things down. There is always the physical layer, the setting of the story. That's my starting point. What emotions would that invoke in a character? What cultures and societies might that setting create? A desert is going to create a different society to one on a floodplain or one from a jungle. So once you start to think in those terms, you can start to think of then how might the people within that culture, within that society respond to events? How would a society that lives in a floodplain respond to a flood compared to one that lives in a desert? I think their responses would be incredibly different. So that is what you can do then. Once you've got these tools and this framework established, you can then start to play with it. Throw sets of unexpected events at people. You can use a lens to see how they react. This is something I tried to do in the Year of the Dark Spring. So my collection of short stories set in Colganon. The basic premise of the story is that there's a comet that appears in the sky and causes a sort of twilight to hold for several weeks. And then each of the stories is set within a different culture and a different land, and looks at how does this culture respond? What are the first thoughts that come to mind? How do they interpret that? Does it cause some ructions within the society? So, with all that in mind and with all that put together, that is how I eventually came to Colganon itself. So I kind of plodded my way through different iterations and conceptions with my restraints in place, and that slowly but surely built Colganon. The final challenge then came to how to give the reader a window onto the world without revealing everything at once, because that sort of ruins the story. So how do you take the reader through the journey of my framework without showing too much behind the scenes? Demonstrate the physical layer, evoke the emotion, and then allow people to rationalize it alongside the characters. My conceit for that, as is many other fantasy writers or writers generally, is to write from multiple different perspectives. You put a lot of work into those cognitive frameworks, so why not make use of them? Why not use them as a framing to explore the world? However, what I have enjoyed the most in constructing whole stories and tales from the view of the historian or the philosopher looking back. So the Colganon, Her Lands and Peoples from Yusaku Kozua's point of view. I really enjoy that framing, and this is in the Year of the Dark Spring. I've done the same thing. And in my novella, Into the Land of the Dying Flame, has a similar framing as well. It's told from the point of view of a roaming rhapsode, although it's not quite clear where he comes from. This is very much an approach that's been inspired by the histories that have come down to us from the ancient world. So that's my background. I have a history degree. I have a passion for history, really. It's my first kind of passion. And this is very much my way of telling a history. So accompanying these blog posts is Colganon, Her Lands and Peoples, which is really my most ambitious attempt to do that yet, is to try and view the entire world of Colganon from the perspective of Yusaku Kozuo. How would a Zosu philosopher from the school of Kunpit of Thelonigul, although he is a Sal Zosu man, how would he interpret the world? How would he view these different cultures? What does he know about them? What does he know about the geography? Does he know about their myths? How does he think about myths and stories and cultural conceptions? So, bringing this to a kind of conclusion, hopefully you find these thoughts insightful and helpful in your own world building. And I hope it would also has invoked within you an emotion of curiosity to explore Colganon further. I'm intending to do more videos like this, hopefully at least once a month, when I find the time, along with other things. And if it has pleased you, please take a look at my website, take a look at my books, subscribe to this channel, subscribe to my newsletter. If you do that, you get a free short story, and you also get early access to Colganon, Her Lands and Peoples, the next updates once a month. You get that 2 weeks early, and various other things that come through there as well. Thank you.